Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Soft Stories. I'm Stratton, this is Pepper, and just off screen we are joined again by our good friend Choopy. I'm sure he will make an appearance at some point. Thank you all for joining me today as we continue our reading of Mary Poppins Comes Back. Last time, Jane and Michael went on an outing with Mary Poppins to visit her cousin and saw things from a new perspective. Let's find out what happens today in Chapter 5, The New One. But why must we go for a walk with Ellen? Grumbled Michael, slamming the gate. I don't like her. Her nose is too red. Shh, said Jane. She'll hear you. Ellen, who was wheeling the perambulator, turned round. You're a cruel, unkind boy, Master Michael. I'm only doing my duty, I'm sure. It's no pleasure to me to be going for a walk in this heat. So there. She blew her red nose on a green handkerchief. Then why do you go? Michael demanded. Because Mary Poppins is busy. So come along, there's a good boy, and I'll buy you a pen'orth of peppermints. I don't want peppermints, said Michael. I want Mary Poppins. Plop, 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 plop. Ellen's feet marched slowly and heavily along the lane. I can see a rainbow through every chink of my hat, said Jane. I can't, said Michael crossly. I can only see my silk lining. Ellen stopped at the corner, looking anxiously for traffic. Want any help? Inquired the policeman, sauntering up to her. Well, said Ellen, blushing, if you could take us across the road, I'd be much obliged. What with a bad cold and 4 children to look after, I don't know if I'm on my head or my feet. She blew her nose again. But you must know. You've only got to look, said Michael, thinking how perfectly awful Ellen was. But the policeman apparently thought differently, for he took Ellen's arm with one hand and the handle of the perambulator with the other, and led her across the street as tenderly as though she were a bride. Ever get a day off? He inquired, looking interestedly into Ellen's red face. Well, said Ellen, half days, so to speak, every second Saturday. She blew her nose nervously. Funny, said the policeman. Those are my days, too, and I'm usually just around here at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Oh, said Ellen, opening her mouth very wide. So, said the policeman, nodding at her politely. Well, I'll see, said Ellen. Goodbye. And she went trudging on, looking back occasionally to see if the policeman was still looking. And he always was. Mary Poppins never needs a policeman, complained Michael. What can she be busy about? Something important is happening at home, said Jane. I'm sure of it. How do you know? I've got an empty, waiting sort of feeling inside. Pooh, said Michael. I expect you're hungry. Can't we go faster, Ellen, and get it over? That boy, said Ellen to the park railing, has a heart of stone. No, we can't, Master Michael, because of my feet. What's the matter with them? They will only go so fast, and no faster. Oh, dear Mary Poppins, said Michael bitterly. He went, sighing, after the perambulator. Jane walked beside him, counting rainbows through her hat. Ellen's slow feet tramped steadily onward. 1, 2, 1, 2, plop, 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 plop. And away behind them, in Cherry Tree Lane, the important thing was happening. From the outside, number 17 looked as peaceful and sleepy as all the other houses. But behind the drawn blinds there was such a stir and bustle that if it hadn't been summertime, a passer-by might have thought the people in the house were spring cleaning or getting ready for Christmas. But the house itself stood blinking in the sunshine, taking no notice. After all, it thought to itself, I have seen such bustlings often before, and I shall probably see them many times again. So why should I bother about it? And just then, the front door was flung open by Mrs. Brill, and Dr. Simpson hurried out. Mrs. Brill stood dancing on her toes as she watched him go down the garden path, swinging his little brown bag. Then she hurried to the pantry and called excitedly, Where are you, Robertson? Come along if you're coming. She scuttled up the stairs 2 at a time, with Robertson A. yawning and stretching behind her. Shh, hissed Mrs. Brill. Shh. She put her finger to her lips and tiptoed to Mrs. Banks's door. You can't see nothing but the wardrobe, she complained, as she bent to look through the keyhole. The wardrobe and the bit of the window. But the next moment she started violently. My glory goodness, she shrieked, as the door burst open suddenly, and she fell back against Robertson A. For there, framed against the light, stood Mary Poppins, looking very stern and suspicious. In her arms she carried, with great care, something that looked like a bundle of blankets. Well, said Mrs. Brill breathlessly, if it isn't you. I was just polishing the doorknob, putting a shine on it, so to say, as you came out. Mary Poppins looked at the knob. It was very dirty. Polishing the keyhole is what I should have said, she remarked tartly. But Mrs. Brill took no notice. She was gazing tenderly at the bundle. With her large red hand, she drew aside a fold of one of the blankets, and a satisfied smile spread over her face. Oh, she cooed. Oh, the lamb. Oh, the duck. Oh, the trinket. And as good as a week of Sundays, I'll be bound. Robertson A. yawned again and stared at the bundle with his mouth slightly open. "Another pair of boots to clean," he said mournfully, leaning against the banisters for support. "Mind you don't drop it now," said Mrs. Brill anxiously as Mary Poppins brushed past her. Mary Poppins glanced at both of them contemptuously. "If I were some people," she remarked acidly, "I'd mind my own business." And she folded the blanket over the bundle again and went upstairs to the nursery. "Excuse me, please, excuse me." Mr. Banks came rushing up the stairs, nearly knocking Mrs. Brill over as he hurried into Mrs. Banks's bedroom. "Oh, well," he said, sitting down at the foot of the bed, "this is all very awkward indeed. I don't know that I can afford it. I hadn't bargained for 5. "I'm so sorry," said Mrs. Banks, smiling at him happily. "You're not sorry, not a bit. In fact, you're very pleased and conceited about it, and there's no reason to be. It's a very small one." "I like them that way," said Mrs. Banks. "Besides, it will grow." "Yes, unfortunately," he replied bitterly, "and I shall have to buy it shoes and clothes and a tricycle. Yes, and send it to school and give it a good start in life. A very expensive proceeding. And then, after all that, when I'm an old man sitting by the fire, it will go away and leave me. You hadn't thought of that, I suppose?" "No," said Mrs. Banks, trying to look sorry, but not succeeding. "I hadn't." "I thought not. Well, there it is. But I warn you, I shall not be able to afford to have the bathroom retiled." "Don't worry about that," said Mrs. Banks comfortingly. "I really like the old tiles best." "And you're a very stupid woman, that's all I have to say." And Mr. Banks went away, muttering and blustering through the house. But when he got outside the front door, he flung back his shoulders and pushed out his chest and put a large cigar into his mouth. And soon after that, he was heard telling Admiral Boom the news in a voice that was very loud and conceited and boastful. Mary Poppins stooped over the new cradle between John's and Barbara's cots and laid the bundle of blankets carefully in it. "Here you are at last. Bless my beak and tail feathers. I thought you were never coming. Which is it?" cried a croaking voice from the window. Mary Poppins looked up. The starling, who lived on top of the chimney, was hopping excitedly on the window-sill. "A girl, Annabel," said Mary Poppins shortly, "and I'll thank you to be a little quieter, squawking and croaking there like a packet of magpies." But the starling was not listening. He was turning somersaults on the windowsill, clapping his wings wildly together each time his head came up. "What a treat!" he panted, when at last he stood up straight. "What a treat! Oh, I could sing." "You couldn't, not until you tried till doomsday," scoffed Mary Poppins, but the starling was too happy to care. "A girl!" he shrieked, dancing on his toes. "I've had 3 broods this season, and would you believe it, every one of them boys. But Annabel will make up to me for that." He hopped a little along the sill. "Annabel!" he burst out again. "That's a nice name. I had an aunt named Annabel. Used to live in Admiral Boom's chimney, and died, poor thing, of eating green apples and grapes. I wonder. But but she wouldn't believe me. So, of course, will you be quiet? Demanded Mary Poppins, making a dive at him with her apron. Oh, I will not, he shouted, dodging neatly. This is no time for silence. I'm going to spread the news. He swooped out of the window. Back in 5 minutes, he screamed at her over his shoulder as he darted away. Mary Poppins moved quietly about the nursery, putting Annabel's new clothes in a neat pile. The sunlight, slipping in at the window, crept across the room and up to the cradle. Open your eyes, it said softly, and I'll put a shine on them. The coverlet of the cradle trembled. Annabel opened her eyes. Good girl, said the sunlight. They're blue, I see. My favorite color. There, you won't find a brighter pair of eyes anywhere. It slipped lightly out of Annabel's eyes and down the side of the cradle. Thank you very much, said Annabel politely. A warm breeze stirred the muslin flounces at her head. Curls or straight, it whispered, dropping into the cradle beside her. Oh, curls, please, said Annabel softly. It does save trouble, doesn't it? Agreed the breeze, and it moved over her head, carefully turning up the feathery edges of her hair before it fluttered off across the room. Here we are, here we are, a harsh voice trilled from the window. The starling had returned to the sill, and behind him, wobbling uncertainly as he alighted, came a very young bird. Mary Poppins moved towards them threateningly. Now, you be off, she said angrily. I'll have no sparrows littering up this nursery. But the starling, with the young one at his side, brushed haughtily past her. Kindly remember, Mary Poppins, he said icily, that all my families are properly brought up. Littering, indeed. He alighted neatly on the edge of the cradle and steadied the fledgling beside him. The young bird stared about him with round, inquisitive eyes. The starling hopped along to the pillow. Annabel, dear, he began in a husky, wheedling voice. I'm very partial to a nice, crisp, crunchy piece of arrowroot biscuit. His eyes twinkled greedily. You haven't got one about you, have you, I suppose? The curled head stirred on the pillow. No. Well, you're a bit young yet for biscuits, perhaps. Your sister, Barbara. Nice girl she was, very generous and pleasant. Always remembered me. So, if in the future you could spare a fellow or a crumb or two. Of course I will, said Annabel from the folds of the blanket. Oh, good girl, croaked the starling approvingly. He cocked his head on one side and gazed at her with his round, bright eye. I hope, he remarked politely, you're not too tired after your journey. Annabel shook her head. Where's she come from? Out of an egg? cheeped the fledgling suddenly. Scoffed Mary Poppins. You think she's a sparrow? The starling gave her a pained and haughty look.
Well, what is she then? And where did she come from?
Cried the fledgling shrilly, flapping his short wings and staring down at the cradle.
You tell 'em, Annabel,
the starling croaked. Annabel moved her hands inside the blanket. I am earth and air and fire and water, she said softly. I come from the dark, where all things have their beginning.
Oh, such dark,
said the starling softly, bending his head to his breast.
It was dark inside the egg, too,
the fledgling cheeped. I come from the sea and its tides, Annabel went on. I come from the sky and its stars. I come from the sun and its brightness.
Oh, so bright,
said the starling, nodding. And I come from the forests of earth. As if in a dream, Mary Poppins rocked the cradle, to and fro, with a steady, swinging movement.
Yes,
whispered the fledgling. Slowly I moved at first, said Annabel, always sleeping and dreaming. I remembered all I had been, and I thought of all I shall be. And when I had dreamed my dream, I awoke and came swiftly. She paused for a moment, her blue eyes full of memories.
And then,
prompted the fledgling, I heard the stars singing as I came, and I felt warm wings about me. I passed the beasts of the jungle and came through the deep, dark waters. It was a long journey. Annabel was silent. The fledgling stared at her with his bright, inquisitive eyes. Mary Poppins' hand lay quietly on the side of the cradle. She had stopped rocking.
A long journey indeed,
said the starling softly, lifting his head from his breast. And so soon forgotten. Annabel stirred under the quilt. No, she said confidently. I'll never forget.
Stuff and nonsense. Beaks and claws. Of course you will. By the time a week's out, you won't remember a word of it. What you are or where you came from.
Inside her flannel petticoat, Annabel was kicking furiously. I will. How could I forget?
Because they all do,
jeered the starling harshly.
Every silly human, except,
and he nodded his head at Mary Poppins.
Her. She's different. She's the oddity. She's the misfit. You sparrow!
Cried Mary Poppins, making a dart at him. But with a rude laugh, he swept his fledgling off the edge of the cradle and flew with him to the windowsill.
"Tipped you at last,"
he said cheekily, as he brushed by.
"Hello, what's that?"
There was a chorus of voices outside on the landing and a clatter of feet on the stairs.
"I don't believe you. I won't believe you," cried Annabel wildly, and at that moment Jane and Michael and the twins burst into the room. "Mrs. Brill says you've got something to show us," said Jane, flinging off her hat.
"What is it?" demanded Michael, gazing round the room.
"Show me! Me too!"
shrieked the twins. Mary Poppins glared at them. "Is this a decent nursery, or the zoological gardens?" she inquired angrily. "Answer me that."
"The zoo,
Michael broke off hurriedly, for he had caught Mary Poppins' eye. A nursery," he said lamely.
"Oh, look, Michael, look!"
Jane cried excitedly.
"I told you something important was happening. It's a new baby. Oh, Mary Poppins, can I have it to keep?"
Mary Poppins, with a furious glance at them all, stooped and lifted Annabel out of the cradle and sat down with her in the old armchair. "Gently, please, gently," she warned as they crowded about her. "This is a baby, not a battleship." "A boy baby?" asked Michael. "No, a girl, Annabel." Michael and Annabel stared at each other. He put his finger into her hand, and she clutched it tightly.
"My doll,"
said John, pushing up against Mary Poppins's knee.
"My rabbit,"
said Barbara, tugging at Annabel's shawl.
"Oh,"
breathed Jane, touching the hair that the wind had curled. "How very small and sweet, like a star."
"Where did you come from, Annabel?"
Very pleased to be asked, Annabel began her story again.
"I came from the dark,"
she recited softly. Jane laughed.
"Such funny little sounds,"
she cried.
"I wish you could talk and tell us."
Annabel stared. "But I am telling you," she protested, kicking.
"Ha ha!"
shrieked the starling rudely from the window.
"What did I say? Oh, excuse me laughing."
The fledgling giggled behind his wing.
"Perhaps she came from a toy shop,"
said Michael. Annabel, with a furious movement, flung his finger from her.
"Don't be silly,"
said Jane.
"Dr. Simpson must have brought her in his little brown bag."
Was I right or was I wrong? The starling's old dark eyes gleamed tauntingly at Annabel.
"Tell me that,"
he jeered, flapping his wings in triumph. But for answer, Annabel turned her face against Mary Poppins's apron and wept. Her first cries, thin and lonely, rang piercingly through the house.
"Oh, there,"
said the starling gruffly.
"Don't take on. Can't be helped.
You're only a human child after all.
But next time, perhaps, you'll believe your betters. Elders and betters, elders and betters,"
he screamed, prancing conceitedly up and down. Michael, take my feather duster, please, and sweep those birds from the sill." said Mary Poppins ominously. A squawk of amusement came from the starling. We can sweep ourselves off, Mary Poppins, thank you. We were just going, anyway. Come along, boy. And with a loud clucking chuckle, he flicked the fledgling over the sill and swooped with him through the window. In a very short time, Annabel settled down comfortably to life in Cherry Tree Lane. She enjoyed being the centre of attention, and was always pleased when somebody leant over her cradle and said how pretty she was, or how good or sweet-tempered. "Do go on admiring me," she would say, smiling. "I like it so much." And they would hasten to tell her how curly her hair was, and how blue her eyes. And Annabel would smile in such a satisfied way that they would cry, "How intelligent she is!" You would almost think she understood. But that always annoyed her, and she would turn away in disgust at their foolishness, which was silly, because when she was disgusted, she looked so charming that they became more foolish than ever. She was a week old before the starling returned. Mary Poppins, in the dim glow of the nightlight, was gently rocking the cradle when he appeared. "Back again?" snapped Mary Poppins, watching him prance in. "You're as bad as a bad penny." She gave a long, disgusted sniff. "I've been busy," said the starling. "I have to keep my affairs in order. This isn't the only nursery I have to look after, you know." His beady black eyes twinkled wickedly. She said shortly, "I'm sorry for the others." He chuckled and shook his head. "Nobody like her," he remarked chirpily to the blind tassel. "Nobody like her. She's got an answer for everything." He cocked his head towards the cradle. "Well, how are things? Annabel asleep?" "No thanks to you if she is," said Mary Poppins. The starling ignored the remark. He hopped to the end of the sill. "I'll keep watch," he said, in a whisper. "You go down, get a cup of tea." Mary Poppins stood up. "Mind you don't wake her, then." The starling laughed pityingly. "My dear girl, I have, in my time, brought up at least 20 broods of fledglings. I don't need to be told how to look after a mere baby." Mary Poppins walked to the cupboard and very pointedly put the biscuit tin under her arm before she went out and shut the door. The starling marched up and down the windowsill, backwards and forwards, with his wing tips under his tail feathers. There was a small stir in the cradle. Annabel opened her eyes. "Hello," she said. "I was wanting to see you." "Huh," said the starling, swooping across to her. "There's something I wanted to remember," said Annabel, frowning, "and I thought you might remind me." He started. His dark eye glittered. "How's it go?" he said softly. "Like this." And he began, in a husky whisper, "I am earth, and air, and fire, and water." "No, no," said Annabel impatiently. "Of course it doesn't." "Well," said the starling anxiously,
Was it about your journey? You came from the sea and its tides. You came from the sky and... Oh, don't be so silly, cried Annabel. The only journey I ever took was to the park and back again this morning. No, it was something important. Something beginning with B. She crowed suddenly. Ah, I've got it, she cried. It's biscuit. Half an arrowroot biscuit on the mantelpiece. Michael left it there after tea. Is that all? Said the starling sadly. Yes, of course, Annabel said fretfully. Isn't it enough? I thought you'd be glad of a nice piece of biscuit. So I am, said the starling hastily. But she had turned her head on the pillow and closed her eyes. Don't talk any more, please, she said. I want to go to sleep. The starling glanced across at the mantelpiece and down again at Annabel. Biscuits, he said, shaking his head. Oh, alas, Annabel, alas. Mary Poppins came in quietly and closed the door. Did she wake? She said in a whisper. The starling nodded. Only for a minute, he said sadly, but it was long enough. Mary Poppins's eyes questioned him. She's forgotten, he said with a catch in his croak. She's forgotten it all. I knew she would, but... Oh, my dear, what a pity. Mary Poppins moved quietly about the nursery, putting the toys away. She glanced at the starling. He was standing on the windowsill with his back to her, and his speckled shoulders were heaving. Caught another cold, she remarked sarcastically. He wheeled around. Certainly not. It's the night air. Rather chilly, you know. Makes the eyes water. Well, I must be off. He waddled unsteadily to the edge of the sill. I'm getting old, he croaked sadly. That's what it is. Not so young as we were, eh, Mary Poppins? I don't know about you. Mary Poppins drew herself up haughtily, but I'm quite as young as I was, thank you. Said the starling, shaking his head. You're a wonder. An absolute, marvellous, wonderful wonder. His round eye twinkled wickedly. I don't think, he called back rudely as he dived out of the window. Impudent sparrow! She shouted after him and shut the window with a bang. And that, my friends, is the end of this chapter of Mary Poppins Comes Back. I remember I got quite emotional at the John and Barbara chapter of the last book. I don't know why these affect me so, but I enjoyed reading it. I hope that you enjoyed the telling of the tale and the introduction of Annabel
Banks family. I must leave you now. But until next we meet, I wish you all the best and many wonderful starlings to watch over you and yours. Goodbye.